The changes in the education sector, the way we assess students, the rise of digitalization and artificial intelligence, the changes in the learning environment, and many other unusual and controversial questions. We will be examining them one after the other in this channel. My name is Daniel Wiśniewski, and this is Education Chapter. Welcome to Education Charter. Today I have a special guest with us, Dr. Rodrigo Melo, a walking institution, a person who is involved, who is actually a reference in many places in the field of education. He's a professor at Catholic University of Lisbon. He is the vice president of the European Federation of Education Employers. He is the chairman of the European Council of Independent Schools. And I think I forgot another title that he has. I'm so sorry, Rodrigo. Welcome to Education Chapter.
Thank you, Daniel. Very nice to be here.
So, Rodrigo, we are here to talk about Portugal, about your country. I think we have had many times all kinds of discussions about the Portuguese system because it's so special. And why is it so special? And how is it special?
Well, Daniel, I think that the Portuguese education system, when we're thinking about K-12, of course, so primary to secondary, has this very unique situation in the European landscape. And it's the fact that all schools, from kindergartens to secondary education, public schools, are managed by the central state, in the sense that all around 150,000 teachers are hired, are tenured, and follow a career with the central government. And this means that public schools in Portugal have no say whatsoever in the teachers that make their working force. And so when we speak about leadership, or when we speak about projects, or we speak about diversity and different ways that each school wants to cater for the students, the public schools, the fact is, every year we have a public contest that every teacher in the country may apply to, and then we have a list based on seniority, and according to that list, first teacher chooses first, second teacher chooses second, and so, of course, we have tenured teachers, but a lot of schools may see 10, 20, even 30% of their teaching force changing every 2 or 3 years, because the teachers were on temporary contracts, or the teachers left, or even just some other teacher from other parts of the country wanted to go to that school and was higher up on the list, and so got to choose first.
It's very interesting because it sounds very controlled, isn't it? Like, of course, I mean, you and I, we've been in to many countries seeing how the education is organized. And Portugal is very special in this sense because it's so centrally planned. It's like everything is in the hands of the government, and somehow it even forces people to kind of move all the time, all over the country. I mean, Portugal is not a large country, but still going from north to the south is a significant change. But then, what is the origins of this? Why did it really happen? Why is it so centrally planned?
Well, Daniel, today it's very strange for us, but this has a historical reason that's very powerful, and it's a structural thing in the Portuguese education system. And again, it's something that's completely different from all other European countries. Just to give our viewers an idea, in 1960, Portugal had the percentage of population who went through basic or secondary education was 1%. So only 1% of the population was in basic or secondary education. And so we had very low numbers of people in schools. In the 70s, mid-70s, 80s, so after the revolution, it started before, but after the 74 revolution, it was a national aim to put all kids in schools, at least for the first years of primary school, you know. And so very quickly, we were hiring tens of thousands of teachers. But again, we were doing this in a country that have a very small rate of people going to even higher education. I was born in 1970, and from my age group, only 15% of us went into secondary education, and only 5% of us went to higher education. And so staffing schools for kids in big numbers was very, very, very difficult. And so what did the country do? The only possible solution. Anybody who could read or write more or less was invited to come into teaching, and this was a good job in the old days. And then people were given the materials and said, look, you do not have to think, you just have to give the materials to the kids. This is the book, read the book with the kids, do the tests, and so the most efficient way to do this was to have a very centralized system that everything was thought through. Even the teaching processes were designed by the small number of people who really had higher education and pedagogies and so on. These were all in the center, in the ministry, writing how you teach and how you assess and giving instructions to the schools, because in the schools we had a lot of people were young people who were just out of secondary education and went into teaching because we had nobody else. And so the system was very centralized, but in a very important way, so we could get teachers for everybody. But as time goes by, this is not the case. 90% of the teachers in our schools now have degrees in education and so on and so on. But still, structurally, this was how the system came to be. And well, 40 years later, it's still a structural thing in our system. The curriculum is not so centralized anymore. And since the last, I would say, 10 years, more and more curriculum power has been given to the schools. But still, the ethos of the teaching profession in Portugal was built for this historical reason as complying to the orders of the ministry. And so it's very difficult to change.
Mm-hmm. So, in other words, if I understand this correctly, because maybe I will sound ignorant. I'm from a different background, okay? Because of course, I mean, in Poland we did have a centralized system, but it's a large country, so we have in the communist times when I was born, it was centralized, but it was sort of centralized among the regions rather. So if I understand correctly, the centralization process or centralization system, central planning system of education in Portugal is a result of this national aim of uplifting the population scholarization. Yes. Without the means to do that. So we needed to centrally plan it in order to make sure that people that may not be even prepared to be teachers could actually teach. But now the question is, how does it sound today to you? And does this system in any way help you to recruit teachers today?
Well, today, of course, even though it was only 40 years ago, today this just doesn't make sense. And we have in recruiting teachers, as you would imagine, two very big problems. One is that because this all happened very quickly and in the 70s, 80s, what happens is now these people that came into teaching and by the tens of thousands are now 60-something. They are all retiring. And they are all retiring at the same time, So we brought them into the schools and they just grew older and older, and now they are retiring. We do not have tens of thousands of people coming out of initial teacher education. And so we have been finding it very, very difficult to recruit teachers. On the other hand, even though teachers are not the best paid profession in Portugal, it still is very competitive in the sense that the average wage in Portugal is very low. And so I would argue it's not that teachers do not earn, they should earn more, but it's not the earning. I would say it's more the fact that this centralized recruiting system makes it so that a young person out of initial teacher education has to go through this contest. They will not get tenured in the first years. Maybe they will take 10, 20 years to get tenure. And while they do not have tenure in a school, they will be going from school to school. but this could be going 1 year, you are 300 kilometers from home. Next year, you are 50 kilometers, but in the opposite direction. And so what we are telling young people is, look, you go there, you don't earn much, but you have all the expenses of getting a house and this and that. On the weekends, you come home because you do not have family, anybody there. And next year, maybe you're there, maybe you're not. Well, of course, young people do not want this anymore. We have very low unemployment rate for college graduates. And so, again, people have alternatives. Even if they say, well, I would like to go into teaching, I am not earning more than I would earn as a teacher, but at least here I know I work in this place, and for the next 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, whatever, as long as I want, I will be working here. And this stability makes it possible to buy a house, to get married, have a family, whatever I want for my life plans.
So in other words, again, I will be rephrasing what you said. Is it you live like a diplomat, you have to travel if you're a young person, you might be displaced, but you're paid like a teacher, so you're not paid like a diplomat, because diplomats, when they get, moved, apart from, having a nice salary, they also get everything else paid. The school for the kids is paid, their accommodation is paid, their lady of the house who supports them in the house is paid, and so on and so on. So all these things, and the clothing often. So all these things for the diplomats is paid. But I assume that the teacher who is actually moved from Lisbon to Porto is paid exactly the same like a teacher, and there's no, let's say, allowances related to this. So in other words, if I am a young person and I want to go into teaching, I try to find a job somewhere else because I can actually decide where I live. And if I would like to start a family, because we are talking about a very feminized profession, then going into teaching is not the best option, because I can be moved all over the country until I actually pass my years to be a mother. Is that correct?
If you really want to be a teacher, the only alternative is going to an independent school, because in independent schools have to follow the normal national labor law. And so you go into an independent school and you get a labor contract, and you are in that place, well, as long as you want.
Then hasn't there been an attempt to change that? Or why is this being blocked this way? Or who is blocking this? Is because, look, to me, this sounds really obsolete. I mean, like, centrally planned economy has been, in fact, well, I dare say, has been, in fact, proven wrong in Eastern Europe. And yet, in the teaching profession, I see it very centrally planned. And now, who is blocking this then? Why is it still there?
Well, I think you have two kinds of blocking groups. On the one hand, you have the unions, because this very centralized system is very convenient if your function is to intermediate between the workers and the employers, and it's very important. There are unions have a place in the social dialogue, but so this is not against it, but it's easier because now the unions only have to battle in one place. It's the ministry. It's centralized and everything is treated at the ministry. On the other hand, for the teacher, it's very difficult to have a meeting with the minister. And so this system gives unions a lot of leverage, a lot of power as the gatekeepers of access to power. And this is why they do not support change. On the other hand, for the teachers themselves, and look, teachers in the profession have more power than prospective teachers, so people who would be coming into the profession. And for the teachers in the profession, they are already in the system. And this system gives people, it's an illusion, but gives an illusion of fairness. Because who chooses first is a list. It's public list. Every year the list is publicized. You can see where you are on the list. So the system is treating you bad, but nobody's going in front of you on the list. If schools were hiring or municipalities were hiring, people say, well, but maybe then they would only hire their friends and that would not be fair, And so this illusion of fairness is always also supporting the system. And thirdly, since it's very centralized, you need very strong political actors to change it. And whomever would try to change it, that minister of education, that prime minister would have a big quarrel with a lot of people, even if a small number, a lot of people. And because the system is centralized, it's very easy for a small number of people to create big chaos.
Yeah.
And so in political terms, it will never change, even though I dare to say that this is probably the main problem of improving quality in Portuguese public education system. And this has a lot of spin-outs in why is there such a big number of students in Portugal going to independent schools. It's 20% of the fact of students are paying tuition, even though they have a constitutional right to free education. No other country in Europe has anything even near to this. Even countries with a big independent school sector, it's completely paid by the state, you know. And so
but hang on. Let's finish one thing because we can get to the tuition. But I wanna look, there's an anecdote about the Portuguese education ministers. Is that apparently Portugal has had, you can prove me if I'm wrong, has had 30 ministers in 15 years. Maybe it's wrong, but I heard such an anecdote in one of the meetings here in Brussels that Portugal is famous for the education ministers because they never last very long. Is that correct?
Well, not anymore, not today, because the last ministers had some time in office. But when you look at the first 30 years or, well, 35 years after their evolution, that would be the case. And bear in mind that this is also a result of that system because the minister micromanaged everything in the system. So it's a big system. We are 10 million people, so it's a big school system. And if you micromanage by one person, of course, you are always out of office because things are always going wrong. It's not possible that things go well.
Okay. You said something about tuitions. You say that in public schools, you don't pay tuitions, do you?
No, not in public schools.
And independent schools, neither.
In independent schools in Portugal, you have to pay tuition.
Okay, but do you receive funding from government as independent schools?
No. The independent schools that receive funding from government are a very, very, very small minority. It's around 20 schools in an ecosystem of almost 700 schools. So it's less than 1% of students in independent schools are funded by the government. All the others, it's the families who are paying tuition.
Okay, all right. So yes, so in other words, it's a public system in which everybody nobody pays. It's actually governmentally driven. It's and everything is in the hands of the government and the unions. Is that correct?
Yes, in the public system, yes.
In the public system. Okay. Yeah. Now, my question is, recently we have had famous results of PISA, which is the program of, it's a program of assessment of students that are being sort of assessed on the basis of a survey and a sample of a representative sample of students. And well, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, Portugal didn't do very bad. It was, I mean, in general, we can say that the results in Europe are much, much worse, especially in comparison to other parts of the world. So Europe in general did worse, but Portugal didn't. So I see, okay, maybe the centrally planned system is actually good for education. What are your thoughts about the results of PISA? But before you do that, I will do some self-advertisement. We did have an interview specifically on PISA with Anna Pons from OECD. In case you would like to watch it, we invite you to do that. I think there's a lot of interesting cases there and stories about PISA and the results and how Europe did in it. So in case you like to see that, we invite you to watch it as well. Now coming back to Rodrigo. Rodrigo, how did Portugal do in PISA?
Well, you know, Daniel, to understand our reaction to the present day PISA, we have again to go a little bit back just to tell you something very interesting. The first time or the second time Portugal participated in teams, so not PISA, but trends in mathematics, sciences, It's very similar to PISA, but for younger kids. The results were so bad, so bad, so bad that the minister at the time said, never again. This is so heartbreaking for everybody that Portugal will not go into these international comparisons. And this was 20 years ago, you know. And in PISA, also, our results were very, very low, very bad. Through the years, they have risen, and we are now completely within the average of the OECD. And we are very happy with this, okay? We are very proud of our education system in the sense that in only 40 years, we were able to come from a system where all students were out of the school to a system where all school-age students are in the school until the end of secondary education. So we have 12 years complete compulsory schooling, and in just 40 years, we were able to do. And this was very important. We are very proud of it. PISA, it's very interesting because when we look at what we have been doing through PISA, we see Portugal, because the issue in the old days was that we would have a small percentage of high achievers, because PISA not only gives you an average, but then the groups, the performance group within the country. But we had a huge number of students in the underperformers. And what happened through the years is that we still have a very moderate percentage of students as high performers, but the percentage of low performers has really gone down. And now we are within the average. I would say that this very centralized system was very good to lift the low performers. So when we think of inclusion, the very centralized system was very good. But 40 years later, the system has done nothing for the average and the high performers. And so this centralized system, in a way, is now obsolete. It has done what it had to do. Everybody is performing at an average level. But now we have to get rid of it, because we have to pull up the average, pulling for high performance, you know? And so inclusion, it's not inclusion versus excellence. We can have both, but we put all our money on inclusion, and now we have to start putting money on excellence, because poor kids can learn. We have a lot of countries where poor kids are learning. And so it's not this centralized system has no way of helping good students or average students, and now we have to get rid of it. We need much more school-based management. We need better teachers, more freedom for teachers and schools. We need different ways of doing this. Let me go back to PISA, saying we came down in this last PISA, but still, despite the pandemic, and the kids who did this PISA, they were 12, 13 during the pandemic. They were out of school. Even when we came back to schools, they were always going home for 10 days because they had COVID. And so it was most of 2 years lost, but
Yes.
still our average on PISA is over our average in 2006. And 2006 wasn't the dark ages. And so even though they were 2 years with almost no schooling or very little number of school days, still they did pretty good on PISA when we look at it this way. And so I think we have space here to reinvent education in a way that it caters better for students to achieve high levels of intellectual development, and not only bringing the underachievers.
Are you trying to imply that the lower achievement or the lower results of PISA are not just or primarily a result of COVID? Because this is what I'm trying to see. Is like you say, okay, we did lower, but in fact, we didn't do very bad. And we did it kind of comparable with 2006, which was even before the economic crisis. So it was the prosperity time. So now the question is, did COVID really, is there a reason for a lower achievement?
Nobody knows why the PISA results went down, but look, we have to have data-driven analysis. And when we hear people from the OECD speaking about the PISA results, and Anna Pons on Edu Chapter, it's a must, people should hear. Everybody is, it's not only Anna, Andrea Schleicher has said it, it's written on their website. The OECD does not know how much of the losses in this PISA are attributable to COVID, but they are saying COVID is not the explanation. It's also an explanation, but not the. So the downward trend was previous to COVID, and it's not possible to say how much of it is COVID. But I would argue, and we still need more data, but looking at micro data in the countries, at national exams in Portugal, looking at the thing is, if COVID was so bad, we should have had more learning losses measured by these national tests and international tests. We have emotional losses. I'm not downgrading COVID. It was a very big problem. What I'm saying is that probably we should be looking into these results and thinking, is the way we still school kids today the best way to do it, teach kids today, still the best way to do it for the future? I think we have come to a turning point, and more people are saying, no, we can do better. We have to do better, but we have to do different. Another thing that OECD and PISA results show us very clearly, and all the technicians are saying so, it's not about the number of hours students sit in a classroom. It's not more hours of math that makes you get better grades at math. You have to be taught math. You have to work hard. That is true, but there's a limit to the number of hours you can do hard intellectual work per day. It's true for adults. It's true for brains that are developing and young kids. And so maybe we could do different things now.
Okay. So if I understand what you're trying to tell me is, okay, COVID did contribute. We don't know how much. Okay. We do see that there's a lower education attainment. Funny story. Funny. It's not funny at all. But an interesting story is that US did even worse. And that's quite surprising, isn't it? It's like countries from the G7 countries, including you. So if you compare EU with other G7, so the most developed countries, we did worse than almost everybody else, apart from the Americans, which is even surprising because America has investment in education. They have decent infrastructure and so on. But then if COVID is not the main reason, you say, maybe we need to rethink the education itself. Because, well, if I understand what you're trying to tell me is, maybe we are not engaging kids anymore. Maybe kids have other things, I don't know, social media, television, who is watching television nowadays? Let's say all kinds of social platforms, all kinds of movie providers, platforms for whatever, for interactions. And maybe education in the old form of it, being in the classroom in front of the, I don't know, blackboard, whiteboard, or PowerPoint presentation, is not engaging anymore. And so the learning experience is not leading to educational attainment. Is that correct?
Daniel, I would say we have, even every day, we have more and more evidence that that is the case. So we design teaching in a way to, and good teaching, and you can have very teacher-centered good teaching, can have very teacher-centered bad teaching, but let's look at people who are doing a great job. The thing is, a great teacher who could, you would have a history class and you would hear the teacher and you would want to go to Rome or to Athens or to the Newfoundland because you were engaged in that narrative and you learned the facts, the dates, the reasons, and thought about it because you were engaged in that story. Well, the thing is, this poor teacher now has a lot of competition outside of the classroom because Netflix has great films about ancient Rome, or Edu whatever, or YouTube. You have TED Talks that are completely... And so, is the best way having that kid in the classroom listening to a very good teacher, or the flipped classroom that we have been speaking about so much for the last 20 years, But when you think about the flipped classroom with the old materials, and so you have to have nice books and photocopies and so on. But look, now we can flip the classroom with great materials, great audio visuals and so on. And so kids are into social media, not because of the information, but because of the way their brains are being chipped to, just the attention span is going down and you have to go. So we have to find a way to bring them back to a more structured learning experience. We have to give them alternatives in teaching that brings them, engages them in this relation with the teacher, because I still do think you have to have personal relation to learn. Even homeschooling movement is about personal relations, the mother or the father and the student. If the school is able to engage students with teachers, let's say we get down the number of hours in the classroom and we go up with the number of hours in the drama rehearsal or in the sports activity with the math teachers. There's no reason why the geography teacher can't help students rehearse a play on old Rome. There are more and more experiences around this world of alternative ways of engaging kids, so that when then you go into the classroom, you have a personal relationship on the one hand, and you have a brain that is really looking forward to what you're going to say and to thinking about it and discussing. I would say this is the only way forward. It's just not possible to have schedules. In Portugal, the kid will have 6, 7 classes in one day. How could anybody even imagine that this is possible, to sit in 7 slots and listen? We all did, Daniel, but on the one hand, we had no alternative. That's what we had. We had no TV. We had nothing else,
No,
teachers and school was it, and friends.
Yes, and we were playing football in the breaks.
And on the other hand, the fact that we did it excluded a lot of kids. Again, in Portugal, Daniel, 15% of people my age went to secondary education. The others couldn't do it. It was not possible. It was not for all. Now we have everybody there.
So again, if I understand it, you would be opting for rethinking how we teach, maybe turning classes into like workshops, more seminars, more like say problem-based learning, or things like more sports, more drama, more applications. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Because it's simply with all the alternatives that young kids have, this kind of boring way of having the teacher in front of the whiteboard and trying to show them something is simply not appealing anymore, is it?
Daniel, I think we have to be cautious, because I think it's really about school-based decision, in the sense that there is also a place for the traditional sitting and hearing to the teacher. The thing is, it can't be the only way. It can't be for 5 hours, So you could have the traditional class and afterwards do. But then I am not able to decide, and this is another thing, that as we have more and more technology, look, it's just not possible to continue to run schools without artificial intelligence. We cannot be fortress school and keep technology out. We now have ways that can use technology to help us individualize learning. We can use technology to help us get rid of the really annoying administrative tasks that teachers have to do, so we could focus teachers on what they are really good at. It's interrelating with kids and engaging them in the beauty of learning. Sometimes hear that kids have to find a reason for wanting to learn this or that. Well, I would say that reason could even be just the pleasure of learning, but that comes out of a relation with an adult who has the pleasure of learning. You do not have to learn math to go to school or do exchange with the currency. No, you can learn math just because math is in everything and it's the structure of the universe. But for this, you have to have a teacher who really thinks that and is not just going through classes and trying to go through administrative work. So technology can free teachers from what they do not have to do, that they do not want to do. And at the same time, technology could have a greater role in, for instance, giving feedback to kids. Look, adaptive testing is very simple. The technology is there, and it's great for students. You as a teacher are not able to do adaptive testing for 25 kids in a class, but the computer is. Why not use it? You as a teacher are better at giving feedback on a specific student. Why is he not able to do this or that? And so teachers who assess and give feedback and teach the lesson, and it's out of, it's no, we don't need them anymore. They are not happy. And this will be a more cherished occupation, profession, if teachers become really more of masters in knowledge and in
And the learning
relations,
process, managers of the
than
learning process.
laborers of, industrialized, giving classes. That's really, nobody will have in very high consideration a laborer, and they will have in very high consideration a more sort of Socratic leader.
Well, Rodrigo, to be honest, we meant to talk about Portugal today, but I think this discussion has evolved into a more a theme of the future of education and the future we would like to see. And I thank you for it. I think I've learned quite a lot today, because indeed, I mean, it's been a while since we are discussing this term, but this idea of making teachers managers of the learning process instead of being these little tribes that kind of pass on knowledge in the traditional form. This has been there around, but I wanted to thank you for the examples of how we could really make it happen. And at the same time, if it's all right, I think that we should meet again to talk about it, or maybe talk about examples of how it is being done, because I think you have quite a lot of knowledge about this, and it will be really an interesting topic to look at in terms of the future of education. So for today, thank you very much for that. To our viewers, well, what do you think about Portugal, about its centrally planned system? Can it be really sustainable? Is there any way to change it? And maybe, yes, what do you think about those ideas that Rodrigo just outlined to us in terms of the future of education and the teachers being the managers of the learning process? How could we prepare them for that? Is it the way forward? Shall we cut the traditional classes and put more drama, more practical approach, more practical application to learning? Let us know about it in the chat. If you like the content, subscribe the channel and stay tuned for the next episodes. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Rodrigo, one more time.
Thank you, Daniel. My pleasure. Let's go on talking.